You think you know the Corsair Air 5400.
But there's one major flaw with this case that no other reviewer has noticed yet, and it could change the way you thought about this case.
No PC case has ever had a chamber like this before. But is it just a gimmick? Or is the performance boost really as Corsair claims? We've uncovered some surprising results from its triple chamber design and air ducts. So is this the future of PC case cooling? Or are we just paying for unnecessary manufacturing and hype? So Corsair calls this a triple chamber case, and the idea behind it is to separate all of the main components so that they are not leaching some of the hot air that they give off. This essentially keeps every single main component cool and operating more efficiently. But does that actually work? Well, that's something we're going to be testing in this video. Let's take a deeper dive. Now, who is this case intended for? Well, by looking at it and how the separations happen with the three unique chambers. First of all, it's not for people who want an air cooler. Now, I'm not saying you can't use an air cooler, but to utilize all of this case's features and the amount of money you are paying for these features, air cooling simply isn't what this case was built for. Custom water cooling. It's not built for custom water cooling either. There is limited space to mount a reservoir. These air guides are in place to help direct air straight into an air-cooled GPU, not a blocked card. And with these air guides installed, you are limited with radiator compatibility. You can't fit a radiator under here, so you would have to ditch the air guides. And radiator compatibility is also limited in this rear chamber where you would put your AIO cooler, and then tube routing would be a pain. I'm not saying it couldn't be done, it definitely could, but you may have to make some modifications to the case. Now, where this case shines is for those users who want to use a liquid CPU cooler. This main chamber directs fresh air straight into the GPU and then straight out the top. There's nothing else in here that is impacted by the GPU's hot air. The liquid cooler has its own chamber, so it's bringing in fresh air and bringing it straight out the rear. And then the power supply is located in the rear and is not affected by anything else. That is what this case is built for. Tell Microsoft to bugger off and get yourself Windows 11 CD keys for 1/10 of the price. Whokeys have a big sale on, and you can use my code IFR25 to get 25% off with loads of payment methods. Copy your code and paste it here to activate. You can even grab Office for your PC for dirt cheap. Don't pay a reoccurring subscription. Use code IFR25 for 25% off. Links are in the description. All Whokeys software products are on sale right now. Let's talk about pricing and SKUs. You can get this in both black and white. One with the RS fans for just below $230 US, and one with the LX fans with the IQ Link hub for just over $300. I think that is pretty expensive. I would like to have seen the lower model at about $200. But one thing that bothers me is why don't they offer a cheaper option without the plastic air guides, without the fans in there? Because some people like to choose their own fans. So let's start with the outside of the case. We'll start with the obvious. We have 1, 2, 3 separate doors on it. This front window door comes with a transit screw, but in order to lift it off, you actually have to take the top panel off, and then you can lift it off its hinges. Now, you'll notice this rear side actually has the curved glass instead of the extra fan mounting here. That's more of a visual look, but this is going to be usually at the rear of your desk anyway, so it doesn't really add much value to this. In fact, the curved glass itself probably just adds extra cost to the manufacturing of the case. This front door is on different kind of hinges and would take a little more effort to take off. And the rear panel of the case also comes with the travel screw. You could actually lift this off like so. Then the only other panel we have is this front panel, which simply slots out like so, and you can just pull it off and have access to install your radiator. The top of the case is pretty clean with a nice blank canvas. We've got Corsair's signature pattern for airflow venting, and you'll notice at the top here that we actually have 3 USB Type-Cs. You can see this is both a negative and a positive. In my opinion, USB Type-C is fantastic. We do a lot of data transfer. However, there is still a lot of USB Type-A out there that we do tend to use. So having that as an option, I think for majority of users would have been better. This top panel is just that push design. All you have to do is pull up on the back and it'll lift off. And this panel is hefty. Doesn't have much flex on there, but you can tell like this thing has some weight to it. While we're still on the outside, let's talk about dust filters. So we do have an included dust filter down the bottom, which just slides out. Included with the case is this optional add-on filter. This is so the dust doesn't get into the radiator that is sitting at the front here. Both the rear power supply panel and the top of the case both did not come with dust filters. I'm not too worried about the top panel because usually air exhausts out there, so dust is not necessarily going to go in there. But the power supply panel, usually the power power supply is breathing air in, so this one probably could use a dust filter. At the rear of the case, when you've got your motherboard installed and your power supply installed, you're going to have lots of cables coming out. Well, Corsair has included their pegboard design down the side of the case, so you can actually use their removable clips, chuck them into the pegboard design, have all of your cables nice and neat running out. The case itself is 469 millimeters high, 468 millimeters wide, and 340 millimeters deep, and sits 27 millimeters off the floor. Well, we may as well start in the chamber. That is the star of the show today. And if you wanted to install a radiator in this section, technically you could only install up to 80 millimeters worth of clearance until you hit this back plastic section. So your typical radiator fan combo will do just fine. Now we have this plastic airflow guide, which helps direct the air in and out of the case. This section is permanently open in this case at the rear as well. Up the top, we also have these brushes. These are for the tubes and any cables to pass through, and it helps to keep the hot air in this section and not go through and penetrate into any of the other sections affecting the components. Honestly, I don't mind the vacuum cleaner look. It's a nice breath of fresh air compared to having grommets everywhere. There is one thumb screw here which holds the plastic in place. So by removing that, you can lift up the whole piece and then you can remove it. Now, I do wonder, with the type of plastic used, how these clips will hold up over time, but I guess only time will tell. This rear radiator bracket here can only support up to 360 millimeter radiators. There is no 140 millimeter fan option. And to remove the bracket, we have one screw up the top and two screws up the top, and it will slide out. To install our cooler, we actually need to remove the plastic bit first. The tubes themselves are required to be up the top. They cannot come from the bottom because the run would not be long enough to reach the motherboard. And the idea is that the tubes will actually pass through the brush. Now we can push the radiator bracket back in place and then screw it in. While both ways work, it's definitely recommended to install the fans at the front, intaking air so that the guide can work as intended. Bring that hot air out the back, and obviously having the fans at the front looks so much better. Moving around to the rear compartment, you can see that we have their pegboard design all the way around the case, down the bottom, down the side of the rear, the motherboard tray, and we also have this panel right here with the pegboard design. One thing that I really think Corsair could have done was included more of these cable holders for their pegboard design. There's only 1, 2, 3 included. Now we can use zip ties with all of these holes, but the whole idea is to be able to move these around. So I think it would have been awesome to include more. This rear panel was a good thought. This is in place so that you don't see your cables through the clear plastic, and also to give extra support, but it is a little flimsy. It's not going to affect anything, but just something worth mentioning. This is a 200 millimeter power supply installed, and you can see that we are getting pretty close to this side panel. In fact, we are 50 mil across. So the largest power supply you could physically put in here before hitting that panel is 250 mil. However, you need to account for cables as well. So realistically, you don't want to go too much larger than a 200 mil power supply. There is, however, still options. You can remove this tray and then you have all the way up to the side of this clear bit of plastic here. But if you want to utilize all of the features of the case, I really wouldn't go too much bigger than 200, maybe 210. This case is the LX version, so it does come with the IQ Link pre-installed. It is just magnetized onto the back of this. Actually makes for a really nice place for it, especially considering this is recessed and allows it to just sit on there. Helps keep it in place and nice and snug. However, it is also a hard drive cage, which could be removed using these 2 screws, but that would mean that we would need to remove this and place it somewhere else in the case. The cage itself can hold a single 3.5 inch hard drive or 2 2.5 inch SSDs. I'm a little surprised though, for such a big case, you would think that you'd be able to fit more hard drive cages in here, or at least down the bottom section here. I feel like this space could have been utilized a bit more, or have multiple options. There could have been 2 more SSD trays right here, which are removable if people want to use it for cable management. I will say though, having this hard drive cage here actually gives us a little bit of access behind it to shove any of our loose cables. A couple of extra notes and features before we move on. We do have a tie down point here. We've also got a couple of tie down points on the edge down here, and up the top here we've got 2 Velcro tie down points. Moving around to the main side of the case, now this is quite an interesting design and a few extra features included with this case, and certainly things that we want to test out whether it is useful or not. But let's just start with the motherboard. If it's easier for you to install the motherboard outside the case, the tray can actually be completely removed. When picking your motherboard, I know that some motherboards I/O stick up a little further than this. There's about 1 mil worth of clearance between the plastic and the I/O itself. I'll be interested to see if anyone runs into an issue there, but that's one thing to keep in mind. In terms of motherboard compatibility, we have a full ATX size motherboard installed. If you wanted to install your eATX motherboard, unfortunately, you are going to have to remove the GPU support bracket. Let's talk talk about these plastic air guides. The idea is to funnel all of the cool air straight into the GPU and then exhaust straight out the top. I think that seems pretty practical for the bottom one, but for the top one, I feel like to exhaust hot air out, you want to be able to collect hot air from even the sides here, but the plastic is blocking it. So from a performance standpoint, I feel like the top should be removed, but you should keep the bottom. But honestly, I don't know how much difference they will make to the temperatures anyway. So we'll have to do a comparison with and without. Down the bottom, you only have the ability to mount 120mm fans. You could have 3 in total. There is no space for radiators, but you do have space to mount 30mm thick fans if you wanted to. If you wanted to bring a radiator onto the inside, you can do that, but you will have to remove this and you'll miss out on this case's features. Up the top is the exact same deal. You could fit 3 60mm worth of fans there. There's only mounting for 120mm fans, 140mm fans. Miss out. Otherwise, this plastic tray would not be compatible with this case. To remove this air guide, there is a plastic clip at the front here. If we lift that up, it releases it and you can remove it. The whole fan bracket can be completely removed from the case as well if you plan on changing the fan orientation just by undoing this one screw right here. For me, when I'm looking at this case, as premium as it is with the thick tempered glass, the curved angles, the thick metal panels, and then I see the plastic air ducts. The plastic air ducts kind of give a cheap vibe to me. It's not really something that I feel like fits this case, and it's something that I automatically think I want to remove it. And to be honest, when I do my tests, if there isn't a big improvement with them installed, then in my eyes, it feels like the case price has been inflated by something that is really a gimmick that doesn't do much for us, and we've paid for that gimmick. So I hope performance-wise, it actually does something tangible. I do love that Corsair have included these 2 brackets that I've installed on the fan. It actually allows you to rear-mount this fan, just like a traditional case layout. However, you need to keep in mind that a little over 1/3 of the fan is actually going to be blocked off by the glass. And number 2, aesthetically, do you think that looks good? Because in my opinion, aesthetically, I like the look of the curved glass without the fan sticking out there, especially when these fans go straight into the GPU. This fan does absolutely nothing for the GPU, and there's nothing else which is really affected. Now, if you really are stubborn and you want to try and fit a radiator up the top here, you have about 52mm worth of clearance between the motherboard and the radiator bracket. However, as this case is intended for, and what majority of you guys will be doing, we're installing 3 120mm fans. All right, let's talk about GPU compatibility for a second. This is the Supreme GeForce RTX 5090, one of the largest cards that we own and one of the hottest. There's 2 things annoying me with this case right now. Number 1, it's gonna be a very tight squeeze between the GPU and the plastic to actually fit the cable down and under. I wanna do my best to hide the cable, so I don't wanna come up and over. I think we might just be able to make it work, but that is a tight squeeze. Number 2, adjustment for the anti-sag brackets on the inside of the case instead of at the rear. And the problem is the GPU's right up against the plastic. I don't even know if I can get the plastic off. If I hold it up a bit, I might be able to somehow squeeze it out. Then once the GPU's in place, am I gonna be able to get the plastic back in? That's a bit of an afterthought. I think that the adjustment for the anti-sag bracket should be at the rear of the case. Let's remove the GPU, we'll get the sag bracket in place, and then we'll reinstall it. The design of this anti-sag bracket's pretty poor. I've actually had to bring the bracket down a little bit so that the GPU is on a slight slant so that it's not actually leaning on the fan. But when I have it all the way up, this fan is actually against the sag bracket itself and it can't spin. Not really a good design. That's also going to be super frustrating to access cables at the bottom of the motherboard I/O if I'm having to constantly try and battle to get this plastic shroud out every time. This graphics card is 359mm in length. Corsair states that you could fit up to a 430mm graphics card. The problem I am seeing here though is if I come about another centimeter, I'm going to collide with this air guide. So realistically, you can only fit a 370mm graphics card in there, not a 430mm graphics card, as Corsair states. It's so close to colliding. Another 10mm, and this graphics card wouldn't fit. We really need to have a serious discussion about this issue because I actually took some time to go and watch everyone else's reviews to see if anyone touched on this. This is quite a big issue. If you're buying this case, you are more than likely intending to put some very high-end parts in there. That could include GPUs that are even thicker than this one. There are quite a few motherboards on the market that have the PCIe slot 3 slots down, the same as this motherboard. In fact, this is one of Asus's best-selling motherboards. If the PCIe slot is 3 slots down, like this one, it really makes this case difficult to work with. But when you're using a motherboard with the PCIe slot only 2 slots down, now you can see we have so much more clearance between the GPU and the plastic air guide that we can now freely remove it. We can freely get the cable in and under. We can freely adjust our GPU support bracket. We don't have the same issues. It's really important to keep that in mind when it comes to purchasing this case. What hardware do you currently have, or what are you about to purchase? It's a new day. Currently, I am heating the system up, but our objective today is to test the system without the air guides in, then to test them with the air guides in, and then I want to bring the AIO cooler and put it up the top of the case to see how much of a difference that extra chamber makes to the system. Let's get into it. Oh, and by the way, for the initial tests, I do want to use gameplay benchmarks because they're repeatable and because gameplay is going to be more realistic to what your systems are going to be going through anyway. Some very interesting results. Avatar was our stress test. The fans were set to 1500 RPM, and round one, I ran the test with no air guides in place. Our GPU reached 67.3 degrees, and I actually ran this benchmark 5 times. Run number 2, I ran with just the bottom air guide in place, and the GPU only hit 63.1 degrees. And round 3, I had both the bottom air duct and the top air duct in place and achieved the exact same result of 63.1 degrees. So what that is telling me is the air guides, they're not just a gimmick. A 4.2 degree temperature decrease is absolutely fantastic. However, the fact that both runs, with one of the runs just being with the bottom air guide and the other run being with both of them in place, got the exact same temperatures, tells me that the top air guide isn't really doing anything for the system. I think it's more just there for show and to match the bottom one. Now, I also ran the tests again to test the effectiveness of the separate compartments with the AIO cooler. Test number 1 was the standard layout with the AIO cooler in its separate compartment, and we achieved 60 degrees on the CPU. Test number 2, I moved the radiator into this current layout that you see right now, up the top of the case. We actually saw a 6 degrees Celsius increase in the CPU temperature. So how do we conclude this? Well, I think this case definitely could be cheaper. I do think the effectiveness of these extra inventions are certainly helping with temperatures. It's just whether or not you guys could justify the price for those decreases in temperatures. I will say the decreases were quite significant. I like the look of the case. I like the feel of the case. I love the temperatures. Not a fan of the price. But you know what I am a fan of? Scoring 34 PCs for $1,200 on Facebook Marketplace, and you can check that video out right here. Make sure you subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.